Hello, and welcome to another Story Explained video. In this one, we'll be exploring the story behind Supermassive Games' choice-based horror Until Dawn. With many branching narratives, gruesome deaths, and an all-star cast, this game was a tense journey from start to finish. So let's dive in. 2014, in the mountains of Alberta, Canada, Josh Washington and his twin sisters Hannah and Beth Washington invite their 7 friends Sam, Mike, Emily, Matt, Jess, Ashley and Chris to their family's lodge on Blackwood Mountain. One of the twin sisters, Hannah, is cruelly pranked by some of the group due to her crush on Mike, who is romantically involved with Emily. The only ones not involved in this prank are Josh and Chris, passed out in the kitchen, and Sam, who is Hannah's best friend, who is trying to find her to warn her of the prank. The humiliation of this prank leads to Hannah running into the woods upset, and her sister Beth running after her. Beth finds Hannah cold and crying, but they are forced to run when they realise they're being stalked. They run into a dead end, namely a cliff edge. Hannah slips whilst holding Beth's hand, and they are both hanging on. A mysterious man reaches out his hand, but Hannah and Beth fall to their deaths, presumably dying in the fall. Their bodies are never found. 1 year later, it's time for the winter break again, and Josh invites all the friends up to the lodge again for the 1 year anniversary of Hannah and Beth's disappearance. A lot has changed. Mike and Emily broke up and now he's dating Jess, and Emily is now dating Matt. Drama. The atmosphere between the friends seems cold and frosty, pun intended, and they all go off and seem to do their own thing. Due to an argument between Jess and Emily, Mike and Jess are sent to the guest cabin by Josh, and Matt and Emily go to retrieve Emily's lost bag. Sam takes a bath. Ashley and Chris go to find a Ouija board in the basement. Just as Mike and Jess are getting cozy in the guest cabin, Jess is brutally kidnapped by an unseen person or creature, being dragged away with Mike in hot pursuit. Mike makes it to Jess, but she's badly wounded, and just as he is about to reach out for her, the elevator she is on plummets into the depths, presumably killing her. Spotting an unknown person, Mike follows them to an abandoned sanatorium. Meanwhile, having found their Ouija board, Ashley, Chris and Josh attempt to use it and seem to make contact with one of the twins. Josh is freaked out and runs off, but not before the spirit tells them to check the library for evidence. Chris and Ashley are attacked by a psycho who rigs them and Josh into a trap, leading to Josh being sawn in two. Chris and Ashley escape and run into Matt and Emily. They are frantic and tell them there's a maniac about, and Matt and Emily climb a radio tower to radio for help. They manage to radio for help, and a ranger says they'll get a helicopter to them, but they have to wait until dawn for rescue. As this happens, the radio tower is sabotaged by someone or something, and it collapses down into the mines. Matt escapes, and Emily is able to get to safety, but they are now separated. Chris and Ashley are captured again by the psycho, and this time he forces Chris to make a decision to shoot Ashley or himself. However, the psycho has the gun loaded with blanks, and the psycho takes off the mask and reveals himself as Josh. It seems that Josh wanted his friends, complicit in the disappearance of his sisters a year ago, to feel the same level of terror and humiliation that they did. Mike angrily confronts Josh, exclaiming that Jess is dead as a result of what he has done, and despite Josh's initial shock to this news, Mike knocks him out, and Mike and Chris tie Josh up in the shed so he cannot do any more damage. Back in the mines, Emily makes a gruesome discovery as she finds Beth's head, and a cross with Beth's name on it indicating a grave. She also discovers that Hannah survived the fall. Emily comes face to face with the stranger who is carrying a flamethrower. Despite running from him, he actually turns out to help Emily and gives her a bag with flares in it, which aids her in getting back to the lodge. The stranger then turns up at the lodge and tells the group what they are up against. Wendigos, which are spiritual creatures birthed out of cannibalism that only stop hunting at dawn. He tells them that they need to get somewhere safe, telling the stranger that he left Josh in the shed. The stranger and Chris go to get Josh, but Josh is gone and the stranger is decapitated by a Wendigo. Chris runs back to the lodge and Sam, Emily, Ashley, Mike and Chris head to the basement. Mike sets out to find Josh by going through the sanatorium, as Josh has the key to the cable car which is needed so they can escape the mountain. On his way through, Mike encounters lots of Wendigos in cells. Sam goes after Mike and discovers him being attacked by a Wendigo and saves him, and as they leave they shoot some barrels, destroying the sanatorium. Sam and Mike find Josh, who is in the mines. He'd been dragged down there and is suffering hallucinations of his dead sisters. Mike slaps Josh to snap him out of it, and he hands over the key to the cable car. Sam separates from them, opting to climb to the surface, and Mike and Josh attempt to cross water. Mike is dragged under but survives, and Josh is grabbed. He spots his sister's tattoo, and the Wendigo is revealed to be Hannah, who drags Josh away. Remember Matt and Jess? Well, they're still alive, and after a short but tense escape, they make it out of the mines. All the remaining friends make it back to the lodge, but the Wendigos have overrun the lodge. The creatures fight each other and create a gas leak in the living room. After successfully evacuating all of their friends, Mike pops a light bulb, and Sam runs and turns the lights on, causing a spark and blowing up the lodge and killing the Wendigos inside. A helicopter picks them up and saves them. Afterwards, we learn that Josh has been dragged deeper into the mines again and is feasting on a body, revealing to us that he is turning into a Wendigo. So that's the basic outline of the plot, but we do have a lot to go through here, so strap in. Let's start by looking at the Cree. The Cree are a real-life people from North America, primarily living in Canada, more specifically living in Ontario, Manitoba, Saskatchewan, and Alberta, with the latter being the location of the game. They are split into subgroups based on the dialect they speak, with our particular Cree people speaking one of many different dialects of the Algonquian language, most likely to be the Woods Cree dialect. Known as a hunting tribe, their beliefs were one of animism, which means that the universe and all natural objects such as trees, plants, rivers, and animals all have souls. They believe the mountain will be cursed if it's ever harmed in any way. This is seen in-game as if you disturb the balance of nature, it can come back and harm you. For example, if Chris chooses to shoot the squirrel at the shooting range, a bird will fly at Sam and cut her eye, which will start to bleed when she's being chased by the psycho, causing her position to be given away by a drop of blood. Their beliefs were that of a supernatural idea. Now, whether they actually believe that butterflies and totems would foretell fortune of prophecy is unclear, but I couldn't find anything about that in my research. One of the real beliefs of the Native American people is that a myth exists called the Wendigo. So let's link this back into the game. As mentioned, the Wendigo are a mythical belief held by the Native American people, including the Cree. The legend is that any human who commits an act of cannibalism leaves their body open to being possessed by the Wendigo spirit, and as a result, this person undergoes changes in their appearance and also physical changes. The Wendigo has an insatiable hunger which can never really be satisfied, so they have a need to feed. They are fast, agile, aggressive, and don't always kill their prey. They appear to mortally wound a human, immobilizing them and dragging them to places likely to feed on them. The transformation to a Wendigo occurs within a short space of time, around several days to be exact. They are able to mimic their prey perfectly, as seen when Ashley or Chris go down to the mines and they think they hear Jess calling out for help. They hunt by sight, and if you don't move, they can't see you. There is an alpha Wendigo that exists called the Macapichu. The word Macapichu is the Native American meaning for he has large teeth. The Macapichu plays a very significant role in this story, which we'll discover later on. If a Wendigo is killed, its host body is destroyed, but the spirit leaves the body and just dwells within the mountain, just waiting to possess its next cannibalistic victim. But how did the Wendigo come into existence on the Blackwood Mountain? So back in the late 1800s, a man called Jefferson Bragg opened up mines in Blackwood Mountain after the discovery of tin and radium inside the mountain. This was despite warnings from the Cree not to disturb the sacred mountain, and Bragg also operated the Blackwood Sanatorium. Essentially, Bragg drove the Cree off their land to build on it and then later established a hotel there, turning it into a resort. Over the years, prospectors mined the resources of the mountain in which they hoped would bring them great fortune. Now, due to the beliefs of the Cree that the mountain is sacred and that no natural thing on the mountain should be harmed, the spirit of the mountain is said to have cried out and the Wendigo spirits are said to have been awakened. All seemed okay at the mine, despite ongoing unmaintained structural concerns, at least until 1952, when a group of miners called the Blasting Crew became the victims of a cave-in when they tried to clear the tunnels using dynamite. We find 30 clock-in cards at the sanatorium, which tells us that 30 miners were trapped with no food and no light. A rescue effort was conducted and 12 miners were saved 23 days later. But why only 12? Well, as a result of severe starvation and madness, 18 of the miners were murdered by the 12 and were eaten. You can guess what happened next. Yep, they were all possessed by Wendigo spirits. They were taken to the nearby Blackwood Sanatorium, and when Mike visits the sanatorium years later, we find a few documents which give us a bit of insight into what happened next. In the administration notes we see that the sanatorium staff were told to make all beds available, so it's likely that existing patients were discharged early so that they could care for the miners. The doctors noted some incredible observations regarding the miners. They expected the men to be malnourished and emaciated, but they appeared healthy, and the miners informed doctors that they found an emergency food supply, which of course we know is not correct at all. A framed photo seems to suggest that everyone assumed that the 12 miners were the only miners trapped. They couldn't find the other 18 for obvious reasons. Outwardly, they seemed fine, however some had respiratory issues and they seemed to be suffering mentally. Dr. Bowen states that these men, after examination, should technically be dead due to the levels of malnutrition, and despite these levels, a patient lifted 725-pound weights. As a result, Bowen ordered that 3 staff be assigned to these patients rather than 1. A telegram is found stating that the press are not to be allowed near the miners. Mike finds a broken camera which could be a reporter's camera smashed on purpose. It seems like someone was trying to cover something up. This is why Mike finds 30 clock-in cards stowed away in a safe, and Emily, while she's in the mines, finds the clocking in machine with the numbers of miners who clocked in rubbed off. This was the doing of Jefferson Bragg. As he was in charge of the mine and the sanatorium, he attempted to bury the entire truth of anything even happening. On the 24th of February, the miners, now Wendigos, attacked the staff, killing pretty much all of them. Jefferson Bragg locked himself away in a hidden room and took his own life. One of the most supporting pieces of evidence that the Wendigos in the sanatorium are the miners is seen through the case of a miner called Billy Bates. Billy was a married father of one who, as seen from a postcard found by Emily, was a bit of a naughty boy as he was having an affair with a lady called Loretta from Calgary. Anyway, Mike finds a case study in the sanatorium which details Billy Bates' observation report. Among the symptoms displayed, the physician notes a scar. Mike recognises this scar on the head of one of the Wendigos and deduces that these are the miners. But who put the Wendigos in the cages? Here's who. The stranger, named Jack Fiddler, is a man of Cree descent. A badass with a flamethrower, the game throws us off at first and insinuates that he is a bad guy who is seen pretty mysteriously up until the point in which he appears to help Emily by helping her escape the Wendigo in the mine. His appearance is that of a man in his 50s with a scar over his eye. Despite his age, he's able to carry around a flamethrower and traverse the mountains fairly well. He wears a dream catch around his neck, a Native American artifact. The night of the twins' disappearance, he was initially hunting something in the woods. He was hunting the Macapichu, the Wendigo Alpha. The Macapichu had seen Hannah and Beth, and the stranger had tried to stop the Macapichu from killing the girls. He warned it off after Hannah and Beth had fallen over the edge, reaching out to pull them up, but failed. He turned around and the Macapichu was back, the stranger finally killing it and its spirit being released. But why was this man geared up to the nines, ready for an all-out war? Well, due to this man's Cree ancestry, he was well aware of the myths regarding the Wendigo. He was well aware of the curse of the mountain. When he's in the lodge with the teenagers, he mentions that it's his mountain. While the teenagers naturally assume that he meant this literally, he only really meant this from a native perspective. He appears to live in the sanatorium and has tamed wolves for guard dogs, so to speak. He has set up dream catchers at different places in the mines. Due to his heritage, he believed that this would ward off evil spirits. So why was he hell-bent on destroying the Wendigo? I mean, they are a bad breed, that's for sure, but this seems personal, an obsession almost. During the game, after his very preventable death, stupid teenagers, his journal is discovered. This gives us plenty of information about the Wendigo, why they just won't die, and where they come from. It seems that the stranger's grandfather was also a hunter of the Wendigo, more specifically the Macapichu. To add a touch of vengeance to it, we find out that the same Macapichu which caused the deaths of Hannah and Beth also killed the stranger's grandfather, so this was personal. This journal shows a newspaper clipping from the day of his grandfather's death, reporting him as dying in mysterious circumstances. Is this signs of another cover-up? And this is where things get theoretical. Jack Fiddler was given as the name of the stranger, but Jack Fiddler was actually a real-life Cree who himself hunted and killed 14 Wendigos. Born in 1820, it's stated that he and his son Joseph were arrested for murder after an eyewitness saw them kill a woman who was in the process of turning into a Wendigo. After being imprisoned along with his son, Jack died by suicide in 1707, aged 87. I'm not sure if the fact that the stranger is called Jack Fiddler is simply just a nod to the real-life Jack Fiddler, or they are intended for the stranger to be related. Anyway, the stranger states that the Wendigo can only be killed with fire and that bullets will slow them down, but it won't actually kill them. As a result of using fire, the stranger managed to drive the Wendigo into cages. The cells we see in the sanatorium indicate that he was successful in this. He mentions that it's just better to lock them up, as that way they are trapped there and not killing them will keep the Wendigo spirit contained inside them. He made totems and copied the designs from the indigenous Native Americans and left them around the mountain, so that explains where they came from. He was fiercely protective over the mountain due to his ancestors, and this was shown in his opposition to the Washingtons buying the property on the mountain. This effectively leads us onto our next part. The father of the family, Bob Washington, was a Hollywood movie mogul, which explains all the movie props in the basement. The family, as a result of Bob's career, were very wealthy, so in the 1990s, Bob purchased land on the mountain in order to turn an old ski lodge into a vacation home for the family. Bob also intended to build a chalet by destroying the old hotel. This was met with opposition from the stranger due to his connection with the mountain being sacred to his ancestors. At one point, Chris finds a letter from the mother of the family, Melinda Washington, which on the back states that there's a strange man hanging outside the generator shed. However, in this letter, Melinda expresses that she respects the land being sacred and offers to make a donation to the Elder Council of the tribe. The Washingtons used the lodge for annual winter getaways, with the siblings inviting their friends over for parties, until of course this culminated in the prank and the disappearance of Hannah and Beth Washington in 2014. Hannah, who despite being Beth's twin is technically the middle child as she was born first. The reason for this prank, as mentioned earlier, was that Hannah had a huge crush on Mike. This obviously upset Emily, who was dating Mike at the time, and Emily's friend Jess, who were the main architects of the prank as well as Mike himself. Hannah's crush on Mike was revealed to be more of an obsession, as she has a picture of Mike on the board in her room as well as numerous mentions of him in her diary. She completed a magazine compatibility test which came out as result C, which meant that you're not compatible, which informed her that she should either let it go or do something crazy like get a tattoo. We find a business card for a tattoo artist in her room, meaning that she's gone ahead with trying to get Mike to like her, so she got a butterfly tattoo. She is naive, as mentioned by Beth when she finds the note from Mike on the side in the kitchen. After falling down off the cliff, Beth was killed, but Hannah suffered a broken leg. She waited 4 days and noted in her journal that she's extremely hungry. 25 days later, Hannah succumbs to hunger and pain, and days after burying her sister, she digs up part of her body and eats it. It's at this moment that Hannah is possessed by the same Machu Picchu spirit which was expelled by the stranger when he killed the old Machu Picchu. It was likely just hanging around waiting for Hannah to succumb to hunger. By the end of the journal, she is completely changed and is now the Machu Picchu. This is confirmed when Josh recognises Hannah by the tattoo on the Machu Picchu's arm. What's important to notice, however, is that Hannah has at least 3 possible opportunities to kill Mike, but doesn't. Firstly, she's watching Mike from afar. Secondly, she watches Mike through slats in a wall, and lastly, she drags him under the water but doesn't kill him. She could have attacked him at any point but didn't. It's certainly possible that she still had some feelings left over for Mike. As absurd as that may seem, another plausible piece of evidence for this is that if a don't move sequence is failed in the lodge, Hannah attacks Mike, but throws him against a wall. She doesn't straight up kill him like she would with Sam. Her strength and size compared to the other Wendigos does seem to indicate that she is the fiercest Wendigo of them all, and is therefore the Machu Picchu. Hannah is shown fighting the other Wendigos from the sanatorium at the end of the game, whilst in the lodge, which potentially shows us that she's still got some of her old memory intact. It seems like she's protecting her friends, at the same time also trying to kill them. This is just a theory, but it's a strong one considering that when Sam finally runs for the switch, she appears to tackle the other Wendigo, preventing it from getting to Sam. She is killed in the subsequent explosion and the Machu Picchu spirit released. As we see at the end, Josh's transformation into a Wendigo occurs after Hannah has been killed, so it's likely that Josh will now become the Machu Picchu. The first of the Washington children. At first, the game does a pretty decent job of showing us that Josh just wants to be with his friends on the anniversary of his sister's disappearance. But obviously we learn soon that that isn't the case. Josh used to be close with his dad, but when Sam picks up the baseball bat in the basement, Josh mentions that he and his dad used to play all the time, but grew apart as his dad became too busy. This explains why Josh was close to Hannah and Beth, and why he took their death so hard. He is a complex character, but it's clear that human interaction is something that he treasures. Josh is revealed to be the psycho, as supported by a number of clues such as the tape found by Sam. He has an extensive knowledge of movie effects and props. This is likely from the influence of his father, which explains how he came up with such elaborate games for his friends to play. It's revealed to us that Josh has some serious issues. From the age of 11, Josh was diagnosed with mental illness. But at some point, it seems that Josh had been misdiagnosed. He has and was prescribed medication for depression, yes, but there was a potential second illness of schizophrenia which was never diagnosed. Due to him not receiving the correct medication, his condition worsened. He was referred to Dr. Hill on the 14th of March 2014, a month after the disappearance of his sisters, as he was flagged as a potential suicide risk and then discharged on the 16th of May 2014. He was extremely paranoid as depicted in his sessions with Dr. Hill. The sessions with Dr. Hill gave us an important view into Josh's psyche. The sessions seemed strained and very short, likely due to the game, but it did seem like Dr. Hill was just waiting for the session to end. He seemed very aggressive and hostile towards Josh and spoke disapprovingly of his actions. With Dr. Hill's office becoming more and more resemblant of his surroundings, these sessions were all in Josh's head. That's how he viewed Dr. Hill. Now, this is largely in part down to how Josh viewed psychiatrists as a whole, being that he's seen so many over the course of a few years. In reality, Dr. Hill was probably nothing like Josh imagined him in his head. Sam finds Josh's phone, which shows that he has concern for Josh, as Josh has revealed his plan regarding his friends, and Dr. Hill asks if he's still taking his meds. So lastly, we'll discuss the part of the story which people were a little confused by. At the very start of the game, we see a wanted poster with a man's name on it, Victor Milgram. Milgram is allegedly wanted for arson and death threats. Chris finds a newspaper clipping in the basement explaining that Victor Milgram tried to burn down the old hotel after it was bought by Bob Washington, who fired Milgram. As well as this, Chris finds a photo of the twins with disturbing threats on the back. But the truth is, Victor wasn't even arrested. It was just a big backstory fabricated by Josh to support his psycho killer narrative for his prank. The newspaper clipping Chris found was from a stack of fake newspapers ordered by Josh. In reality, Victor Milgram was just a janitor who worked in the sanatorium in 1952. Shown only in the VR game The Inpatient, Milgram helped a reporter gain access to the sanatorium as he believed there was some strange stuff going on in there. This reporter was likely the one who was attacked and mentioned in the newspaper article from 1952. The broken camera likely belonged to them, and another interesting point is that this reporter was actually hospitalized. When the protagonist wakes up in the hospital in The Inpatient, he is suffering from amnesia and is being questioned by Jefferson Bragg, who of course was trying to keep the whole entire thing secret, so this just all adds up. We know what happens next. The miners turn into Wendigos, and the protagonist resorted to cannibalism and turned into the Machu Picchu, which in turn years later led the twins off the cliff and was killed by the stranger. But anyway, I hope this did a lot to explain or cover any confusion that you had around the story of Until Dawn. It was an awesome game and I really enjoyed my playthrough of it, and if you did enjoy this video then please leave a like and subscribe and comment down below. Help this video travel through YouTube, but for now take care and I'll see you in the next one.